Imagine an old, rough, wooden box, originally designed to hold rusty arrows in a cold weapon store. It is long, narrow, and covered in dust. No one would ever guess that this piece of junk would become the final resting place of the most powerful woman in England. Yet, at noon on the 19th of May, 1536, the headless body of Anne Boleyn, the deposed queen, was hastily stuffed inside it. No velvet-lined coffin, no cross, no farewell befitting royalty. In just 17 days, she fell from the pinnacle of glory to the abyss of shame. Accused of adultery, incest with her own brother, and treason, these were the most heinous crimes imaginable, pinned on the woman for whom King Henry VIII had once torn apart the Roman Church to marry. But why? And how could a king, once madly in love, order the slaughter of his wife so coldly? Welcome to the bloody and mysterious final hours of Anne Boleyn. Today, we will not just look back at history. We will walk with her to the scaffold to witness the true cruelty of the Tudor crown. The clock strikes 2 a.m. The Tower of London is shrouded in the thick fog of the Thames. While the city sleeps, the cell of Queen Anne Boleyn remains lit. The air is thick with the smell of beeswax candles and fear, but strangely, laughter is heard. Sir William Kingston, the constable of the Tower, recorded a chilling fact in his diary. She has much joy and pleasure in death. Anne was joking with her ladies about her little neck. Had she gone mad, or was this the liberation of someone who finally saw her husband's true face? Outside those cold stone walls, Thomas Cromwell, the architect of this execution, tossed and turned. He knew better than anyone. Henry VIII was fickle. If morning came and Anne was still alive, the king might change his mind. Cromwell needed Anne dead the moment the sun rose. A race against time, against conscience, and against Anne's life was taking place in the shadows. A few miles upriver, at the lavish Whitehall Palace, King Henry VIII was not losing sleep. He was waiting. Not for news of a pardon, but for the boom of a cannon from the tower, the signal that Anne was dead. Why? Because Jane Seymour, his new lover, was waiting for him in Chelsea. Henry wanted to clean up the old marriage before sunset so he could marry his new wife immediately. To legitimize this cruelty, Henry needed more than a death. He needed total erasure. 3 days prior, he forced Archbishop Cranmer to declare the marriage to Anne null and void from the beginning. This turned Princess Elizabeth, their daughter, into a bastard overnight. Anne lost her life, her title, her child, and her dignity. Henry didn't just want to kill her. He wanted to pretend she had never existed. At Lambeth Palace, Archbishop Thomas Cranmer paced his garden. He was the man who helped Anne rise. He was her confessor. He knew Anne was innocent. Had she truly committed adultery, she would have confessed to him to save her soul. She did not. Her silence was the loudest proof. Just then, a friend ran to Cranmer, his face pale. He recounted a nightmare he'd just had. I saw the Queen's head severed, so clearly I could count every nerve, every vein throbbing. Cranmer looked up at the sky, tears streaming down his face. She who has been the Queen of England upon earth will today become a queen in heaven. Even the most powerful men felt the injustice of this case reaching the heavens. But no one dared to speak. To speak now was to sign one's own death warrant. Dawn broke. Anne Boleyn knelt to pray for the last time. But there was a strange detail in her sentence that few noticed. Under English law, a woman guilty of treason was to be burned at the stake, a slow, agonizing death that destroyed the body beyond recognition. However, Henry VIII granted a mercy. An ancient document in the National Archives records, "Moved by pity, we do not wish the Lady Anne to be burned. Her head shall be cut from her body." He swapped the axe for the sword. Why a sword? Axes were blunt and brutal, often requiring multiple hackers to sever a neck. The sword was sharper, faster, more noble. Henry wanted Anne's death to be beautiful and clean, just as he wanted to wipe her from his memory. But behind that mercy was a cold calculation. England had no swordsman skilled in beheading. Henry had to hire an expert from Saint-Omer, France. But look at the timeline. This executioner arrived in Dover, crossed the sea, and was present at the Tower before Anne's trial had even concluded. What does this mean? It means Henry had signed his wife's death warrant before she was even found guilty. The trial was a play, a bureaucratic formality to blind the public. Anne's fate was sealed the moment Jane Seymour sat on the king's lap. Anne had zero chance of survival. No matter how brilliant her defense, she was a lamb slaughtered before she even entered the slaughterhouse. According to the plan, the execution was to be private to save royal face, but a fatal mistake occurred. The gates of the Tower were left open. Thousands of Londoners, from nobles to beggars, flooded the green. They were curious, they were bloodthirsty. They wanted to see how the woman labeled the King's Whore would die. In that crowd were familiar faces. The Duke of Norfolk, Anne's own uncle, who abandoned her to protect his power, and Thomas Cromwell, standing there with a look of triumph. Anne stepped out, not in a state of disarray, but heartbreakingly magnificent. She wore a dark gray or black damask gown over a crimson petticoat, the color of blood and martyrdom. She was sending a final message: I die as a queen, not a sinner. Anne was escorted by 200 yeomen of the guard. She walked tall, but her eyes darted constantly toward the gates. What was she looking for? A messenger, a rider carrying a royal pardon. Until the very last second, Anne still believed that Henry, the man who wrote her hundreds of love letters, would not have the heart to kill her. But no one came. There was only the suffocating silence of the crowd and the cold stare of the executioner. When she stepped onto the scaffold, she turned to look at her 4 weeping ladies. She smiled to comfort them. Anne's composure made even those who hated her shudder with respect. The Spanish ambassador, Anne's sworn enemy, admitted, she was braver than a lion. Good Christian people, I am come hither to die, for according to the law. Anne's voice rang out, clear and unwavering. She did not admit guilt, but she did not curse the king. Why? If she claimed innocence, Henry might take his anger out on her daughter, Elizabeth. Anne chose to die in submission to protect her last drop of blood. I pray God save the king. For a gentler nor a more merciful prince was there never. A blatant lie, but a brilliant final political move. She died so her daughter could live. It was the ultimate sacrifice of a mother. The French executioner asked Anne to remove her headdress. She knelt, her eyes blindfolded with a white cloth. She whispered, To Jesus Christ I commend my soul. Lord Jesu, receive my soul. The executioner, in a rare moment of mercy, took off his shoes to walk silently. He signaled his assistant to make a noise on the left to distract Anne. As Anne turned her head toward the sound, swish! The sword sliced a clean arc, so fast the eye could barely follow. Anne's head fell into the straw. And here is the most horrific detail witnesses reported. Her eyes were still wide open, and her lips were still moving in prayer for a few seconds after her head was severed from her body. Was it life clinging to a dead vessel, or was it a final curse that could not be spoken? The moment Anne's head fell, the cannons at the Tower roared. At Whitehall, Henry heard them. He shed no tears. He felt no remorse. He stood up, boarded his royal barge, and went straight to Jane Seymour. He was free. Henry's cruelty lay not just in killing his wife, but in his chilling indifference to the death of the woman he once slept beside. Back at the scaffold, Anne's body was abandoned. No one had prepared a coffin. Cromwell wanted her death to be so swift they forgot the burial. Her ladies, in panic and grief, found an old arrow chest. They forced her bloody body into it, placing her head beside her feet, a humiliating end for the once proud White Falcon. Henry and Cromwell tried to erase every trace of Anne. Portraits were burned, initials chipped off walls, her name forbidden. They wanted the world to forget Anne Boleyn ever existed, but they were wrong. Cromwell, the mastermind, was executed by Henry just 4 years later at the very same spot where Anne died. Instant karma. And Henry, he died diseased, obese, and lonely, leaving behind a chaotic kingdom. But the greatest legacy Henry left was not his weak son, Edward, but Elizabeth, the daughter he rejected. Years later, when Elizabeth I became the greatest queen in English history, she always wore a special ring. When she died, the ring was removed, revealing a secret mechanism. Beneath the diamond was a tiny compartment containing a miniature portrait of Anne Boleyn. For 44 years of her reign, Elizabeth silently carried the image of her executed mother. The ring, Made of mother of pearl, a symbol of purity, was Elizabeth's silent, steely declaration of her mother's innocence. Anne Boleyn died, but her bloodline won. Henry wanted a son to save the dynasty, but it was the daughter of the traitor who brought England to its golden age. Every year, on May 19th, a bouquet of anonymous red roses is delivered to Anne Boleyn's grave in the Tower Chapel. No one knows who sends them, but it is proof that the world has never forgotten her. Anne is not just a victim. She is a symbol of resilience against injustice. The story of Anne Boleyn reminds us that history is written by the victors, but the truth is never buried forever. What do you think about Anne's death? Was it a tragedy of love or a perfect political assassination? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this video gripping, don't forget to like and subscribe to join me in uncovering the darkest corners of history. See you in the next cold case, where the past never sleeps.